I recorded today's podcast on March 3rd, 2020 with Victoria Ryce in my Toronto office, and I'd planned to release it at the end of March, but then the big virus shut everything down, and for the last 3 months, the podcast has had a lot of COVID-19 content, but this was a great discussion, and I didn't want to hold it unreleased for too long, so here it is. We don't like change. We like to stay in our comfort zone. So what happens when you're forced to transition? Maybe it's a good transition, like having a child or getting a promotion. Maybe it's not so good, like losing your job or being forced to move unexpectedly or separating from your spouse and you have to start over. How can you handle it? That's the topic on today's podcast with Victoria Ryce, and it starts right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
My guest today is Victoria Ryce, who was a guest back on show number 131 3 years ago in March 2007, where we talked about how to master being suddenly single. Remember that show? I do. It was a two-part episode. She returned for show 133. I don't think it was actually two parts. I think we talked for like an hour and we split it up is what happened. And we continued the theme of the discussion of the financial impact of becoming the CEO of everything, which just so happened to be the title of a book that you co-wrote with somebody named Gail. I don't know this person. Gail, who is this?
Gail Vaz-Oxlade.
Oh, Gail Vaz-Oxlade. Oh, okay, I got you. CEO of Everything, Flying, Solo and Soaring, which is an excellent book, actually. Transitions was one of the themes of that book, as you will recall. And we're going to talk more about that today. So, Victoria, welcome back.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for making the trip to Toronto. Now, I encourage everyone to go back, stop the tape, and listen to episodes 131 and 133. You can hear a bit of our previous conversations, but perhaps to get us started, if you could give us a little bit of your backstory. What led you to the point where you were co-writing that book with Gail, and sort of what's happened since?
When Gail had her website and blog up, I was blogging from the perspective of someone who was older and transitioning into, unfortunately, widowhood. My husband had died and Gail was getting divorced, and we realized, wait a minute, we need some help for people. We were lucky we had each other, so we could talk to each other about what was going on and how we felt and what we were experiencing, but not everybody did. So Gail one day phoned and said, I think this is a book. I think we should write a book on being CEO of everything, because that's the expression I used to use.
And it was an excellent book, and you went through, there's a ton of practical stuff in there. And so I think that's why it's an excellent read for people who are going through the specific types of things that you talked about. But really, I think those principles apply in pretty much every kind of transition. I mean, is that not correct? So walk me through some kinds of transitions. So I mentioned a couple off the top, having a child all the way to becoming a widow. What are some of the other transitions in the middle that cause us some grief or upset, or just affect the way we're approaching life?
Well, Doug, you're transitioning all the time. You are transitioning. For instance, do you remember the day you transitioned from child to adult?
I don't.
And neither do I. And so this is one of the things to remember. We're transitioning all the time. We are certain fitness levels. We have certain financial circumstances. We have certain relationship items that we're dealing with. And so we are transitioning. And that's what, when we think about it, if we realize, maybe if I embrace transitioning and realized that it's occurring all the time, just time helps, in fact, understand transitions.
Well, there's nothing you can do about it. I do remember the time I transitioned to being, a grown-up, and I don't remember the exact day or anything, but it was, I was, married, and my family was coming over to my house, for dinner, and I sat at the head of the table. Because it was my house, you see.
Yes.
And so my dad sat over there and my mom sat. Whereas, of course, when I'm at their house, well, this is where dad sits and this is where mom sits and everything. So there are things like that. Okay, that's interesting. I'm now, and it kind of jumps up on you. It's like having a kid that, wait a minute, now I'm a parent? Like 2 years ago, I was a little kid, and now I'm a parent myself. So our transitions, they're happening. That's your first point. So and they're happening all the time. So what's the mindset we should have going into them then? That they're inevitable, and oh boy, or wait a minute, I should be embracing this. Like how do you look at it?
many years ago, I came to the conclusion that transition or change was happening often. And I thought, there's really two kinds of change. There's one that falls on your head, and there's one that you decide to make from within. And the rhetorical question is, which do you like best? Well, of course, you like the one you decide to make. And at the same time, the other rhetorical question is, which one happens more often? Bang, 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 bang. Like, did you ask for HST?
I did not.
Okay, there was a change, but once it came about, you had to deal with it.
Yeah. So transition happens either because it's forced upon you or because you push it yourself. You decide, I guess.
That's correct.
So you think of transition as a passage. What do you mean by that? What are you talking about there?
It's a journey. And one of the things that people can think about is when something unexpected happens. You might be forced into a transition. That's one of those things that fell on your head. And when that happens, you are suddenly in that moment of chaos. Like, what's going on here? Where am I? What do I control? And at that point, you may feel you control very little. And that's a point where you get nervous or anxious or worried or you're just unfamiliar. You talked about taking the train in this morning, and I took the Presto card to come on the subway, and I hadn't done it before. And I'll tell you, the first time I did it, I'm supposed to tap somewhere. Tap,
I know.
tap,
Where are you
tap,
supposed to
tap?
tap?
Where am I supposed to tap? And so, but now I've done it 3 times. Hey, I'm better at it.
Yeah, it took me a few weeks to figure out because I'm always tapping down here. No, you're supposed to tap up here where it says tap. But
correct.
I'm a slow learner then. And so you were less intimidated the third time than the first time, I guess.
Correct. And I started to think about this because I went back and reread your book.
Oh, Straight Talk on Your Money?
That book.
The biggest financial myths and mistakes and how to avoid them? Yes,
and
sure.
see all these little tabs?
That's excellent. Very dog-eared. I like that.
Those were transitions. And one of them I know in the book that you talked about was when you and your wife called it BK, before kids. Well, that was a transition for you before you had kids and now when you do have kids. Well, things are going to change. The landscape's going to change. I like to think of it like a baby mobile. And once you shift just a little piece of the mobile, we all know what happens, right? The whole thing starts moving. And so the first time you're going through a transition, lots of moving pieces kind of happening. And so one of the things I like to think about is that if we can develop our coping skills, because that's really what it is. When you're going through change and transition, it can be forward and backwards, and once you get it, and then there's a backslide here and so on. But if we think of it as good coping skills, that's what's excellent. Because if we are coping well, it means we're dealing with life. We're bringing the stress down. And one of the things I'd really like to emphasize, Doug, is that when you are coping with whatever's going on with you, just like you were talking with your family, your kids are watching you and your coping skills. That's where they're learning their coping skills. And since change seems to be accelerating, they're going to have more and more chance to be dealing with new things. And therefore, they need excellent coping skills. And you want them to feel confident in the world and able to go forward. And these coping skills of whatever's happening, we can deal with it. We can understand that. We've done things like this before. Other people have done it. We can do it too. So that's the kind of pep talk that I like people to think about for themselves.
And I like that. We've done this before. So we are recording this in early March. I'm not sure when it's going to be released, but it's early March. And we're in this whole coronavirus thing right now. Okay. And so by the time this airs, maybe the world will have ended or maybe coronavirus will have ended. Well, that's a perfect example of something that has happened before. Not that exact thing, but we went through SARS here in Toronto, that sort of thing. So what does the past teach us about that then? That we survived it before, we'll survive it again? Is it as simple as that, or is it more nuanced than that?
There's probably also something else to think about, which is that when we have experienced something before, we have a little bit more confidence when we're going forward, because what we've done is we've built a few neural pathways. So in our brain, what we have are ways of doing things. Like you get in your car, you probably don't even think about it anymore because you've built all these neural pathways. And so if we look at the coronavirus as an example, okay, it's a change that fell on our head, but we have a little bit of experience of dealing with this because of other past events. But we might need to build some new neural pathways. We might need to say, oh, okay, well, then maybe I need to think about things this way now. Or, gee, it wasn't in my kind kind of realm of experience before. But now that it is, oh, okay, that gives me more coping skills. That gives me more opportunities. I can build new neural pathways of other ways of dealing. If you're only a one-trick pony, you only have one response. And if there's anything we've learned about the world, is that different items that are happening that cause us to transition means, well, I love the way Katharine Hepburn says it. You can ignore reality, but not the consequences. So there's consequences to many of these things. And so the more skills you have in coping and moving forward and thinking creatively about how to deal with this.
So do you think there is anything new? And obviously everything is new, but nothing is 100% new. Isn't it 20% new or 80% new or 90% new or whatever? So again, using the coronavirus as the example, okay, it's a new thing, but isn't it 80% the same as that last virus? I mean, isn't losing your job 80% the same as, when I got, laid off from my last job? And that's really where the coping skills come from, isn't it? It's drawing on the past history where, I was in a situation similar to this. Not exactly the same, but here's how I survived that. What can I draw from that? Is that what you're talking about coping skills wise?
I think so. And you used to work for KPMG.
I did.
And I did work for KPMG once on contract, and I worked in their relocation services. So these were people who'd been let go of their jobs. And I walked in to talk to them about innovative job search methods. And so the first thing I said, because everybody at that point is high alert,
stunned,
oh my gosh, etc. And so the first thing I would say is, how many people here have lost their job 5 times? Eyes widened, gasps, and people, oh, no, like for most of them it was the first. And I said, well, I've done 5. Twice for myself, 3 times for my husband. So at that point, all sorts of people in the room just pulled themselves off the ceiling and got into the chairs and said, oh, okay. And my message was, I've done it, and you can do it too.
You also, and I totally agree with that. So I guess when we're coming up with practical takeaways, look to the past where you've been in a similar situation. What can you draw on that? And it's not as scary as what it may otherwise appear to be. Now, you also made another comment. You said that change is accelerating. So what do you mean by that?
If you look at the number of things you now do in a day, I read an article out of the States that said the average house has 300,000 things in it.
300,000 things in it.
Correct. So if you think back to the home you grew up in, did it have 300,000 things in it?
Likely not. I mean, I guess if you broke it down, so let's talk about the kitchen. Okay, well, how many things are in the kitchen now versus were in the kitchen, 50 years ago? Well, now we got the Instapot, which is the greatest thing ever. I don't know if you,
takes away 5 appliances.
Right, but that's a new thing. You've got probably more pans. You got a different kind of this and a different kind of that, and that's just that one room. You go to the room where your TV is. Well, 100 years ago you didn't have a TV. 50 years ago, I guess you had the black and white one. And now you got the thing with 1,000 channels and the this remote and the speakers and the this and the this and the this. So I guess our lives are more complicated as well as accelerating faster?
Much more complicated, much more complex, many more moving pieces. And therefore, you're trying to coordinate things. This is one of the challenge many people come up with is all of a sudden something happens and they've thought that they're going to deal in an ideal world where the subway works exactly on time, the trains work exactly on time. I will be able to get this job done in 2 minutes. There's no 2-minute jobs, just so you know, Doug.
I understand.
And so one of the things that happens is that when you realize, wait a minute, I am dealing with kids, a job, a relationship, friends, family, parents might be ill. Okay, how do I help in the financial world? And I was thinking about this because in your previous podcast, you talked a lot about people who said, gee, I wish I'd come in to see you sooner. And that got me thinking that oftentimes when people are coming in to see you, it's already to the point where they've tried everything they know. And so what has happened is that they're coming in to see Dr. Doug. It's an emergency room. It's a 5-alarm. And it's code red. Whereas one of the things that I think is really practical is if people just came in to talk to you to say, uh-oh, I've noticed something, and this is actually psychology, because there was a wonderful psychologist who said that there's 5 stages when something is going on. There's the pre-contemplation stage. This is where you're a happy little clam and everything is working really well. But then something happens, and all of a sudden, you're a meerkat. Your head is up and you're suddenly contemplating something is going on. And it sounded to me that a number of people, when that happens, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm just going to keep my head down and see if I can keep piling through this. But if you do keep your head up and say, okay, I need to address this, let me at least get a second opinion from Doug, then what will happen is then people can plan, take some action, and then maintain what's going on.
Yeah, because in the financial realm, it's a lot easier to deal with something when you've got more options.
And when you get more options, if you have more time generally.
Yeah.
Because then you can make some changes. But if it's narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, that means that you've got less options.
Yeah, when you come in here, and we're recording this in my Toronto office here at King & Young, if you come in here and see, Scott Terrio or me, and your wages are already being garnished because you're so far behind on your taxes that CRA has frozen your bank account and is garnishing your wages, okay, we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room here. Whereas if it's, well, I've just filed my taxes and I realize I owe some money for last year, okay, well, they're not, going to start shooting you yet. Let's figure out what a plan is. But how do you know when I need to be proactive and when, okay, it's not that big an issue? How do you know what the severity of the potential issue is, whatever it is? Is there any way to think through that, or is it, always best to attack things head on?
Sometimes in your gut, this is getting worse instead of better. It's really a question where you say, am I avoiding? Am I not taking some action when some action would be helpful? Because if you make a choice, then what happens is you actually start. It's an act of will when you're making a choice. But if a choice is made for you, like you said, wages are already garnished, you're already on people's radar, less wiggle room.
So you can use your gut as a pretty good indication, because your gut knows before your brain knows what's going on. Now, you've also told me that you believe that in a time of crisis, you become more creative. And I guess I could argue the other side of that, which is, well, have you ever seen a deer? They're just staring there at you and they don't even move when you're driving your car right towards them. They sort of freeze right up. So I guess in some cases, that's our natural reaction. We freeze right up. But I guess once you get over that initial freeze up, you think you're actually more creative. Again, that what animal was that where I'm up there, the lemur or something there?
The meerkat.
The meerkat there. I don't know what a lemur is actually. But so that's the heightened creativity, I guess. Is that?
Because what happens is when you are in unfamiliar territory, this is this passage of transition, when you're in unfamiliar territory, you're not playing by the same rules. You've got other options where you say, oh, okay, normally I wouldn't dress this way, but now I'm going to dress this way. Or normally I wouldn't go here and eat or go here and shop or go at home and stay. Normally I wouldn't, but what is it we can do? Yeah, that's one of those lovely questions where you say, what can we do for free? And that gives people other options. Like I'm here in Toronto right now, I'm acting like a tourist. And it's very interesting because I'm unfamiliar with the city now. And so I'm acting differently. I notice I smile at people in the subway and a lot of people look at me. They're not sure what to do.
What are you, some kind of weirdo? What's going on there? Yeah.
But it gives you an opportunity to do something differently. And when we are more creative, it means that we are opening again our brain to more, our neural pathways to say, okay, maybe there's another way to do this. We don't have to do it the same way.
Yeah, when I drive to work or, take the train here, it's the same route all the time. I don't have to think about it. I turn right at that drugstore and go here. Whereas, what you're experiencing today, okay, I'm on a street that I'm not usually on. I've actually got to think it through. And that's what gives you that heightened sense of awareness, I guess.
Yes, it does. And one of the things when people get nervous about change or nervous about transition, they will often revert back to the known, because the unknown seems chaotic and dangerous or scary. Whereas the known, okay, I know that person or I know that route. And what we can do is if we can just say, let's just breathe and let's be creative here, because there has to be other options. There's so little in life that's just one way.
So I want to get to the practical advice portion here, but we're sort of giving contradictory advice here, because we're saying when you're in a situation like a job loss, well, go back to the past and look at when you've been in a similar situation. How did you handle it? Let's take the good from that and move forward. But then we're also saying, well, sometimes you can't just fall back on the known. I mean, maybe that's what got you into this situation in the first place. You know, I got lost going down the wrong street. Well, continuing to go down the wrong street isn't going to help me either. So how do you separate the two? How do you know when you got to lean on the past, and how do you know when you got to plow forward?
It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? It's a bit of this and a bit of that. And one of the things that you can do is think about the attitudes. What is the attitude I need in this circumstance? Like if I suddenly run screaming around the room, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, is that going to be helpful? Is that going to work? Has that worked for me in the past? Well, not so much. Instead, if you say, what did I learn from the past? Okay, well, I developed these skills at this job and these skills. So now I know I need to present a resume, and I know how to do that because I've done it in the past. However, maybe I need to be a little bit more creative about how I do it, how I present it, how I present myself. And that's one of the things to say, bit of the old, bit of the new, as you said. Oh, and it was years ago, Doug, I'm now remembering. This tells you how many years ago. An idea only had to be 10% new to make you $1 million. So in some ways, that's what you're thinking about, is what do I want to bring in that's new and interesting, but what from the past actually was really helpful, helped me cope, and can work for me in this circumstance.
Yeah, because the solution will be a combination of both of those things. So I'm a big believer in having a plan. Now, that takes many different forms. You know, I'm less of a believer in having a rigid budget when it comes to finances, because I find that, you know, people aren't able to stick with it. This is one area where I disagree with Gail. We've had many discussions about that. She's never convinced me. I've never convinced her. But we both agree you have to know where your money's going. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're really disagreeing. I think it's more of a semantic argument that we're having. But I'm a big believer in having a plan. Is that really the first step in managing a transition then, is to have a plan to manage through the transition, or is that looking at it the wrong way?
I'm reminded of the guru of strategic planning, Henry Mintzberg, who said the reason you have a plan is so you have something to deviate from.
Interesting.
So, yes, a plan.
We're giving lots of contradictory advice here. Yes, you have to have a plan so it's something you can deviate from. What does he mean by that?
If you think about an airline pilot, do you realize that over 90% of the time they are flying that plane, it's off course? And yet you still get there. So what's more important is to pick the goal, to pick the destination. If this is a journey, then, okay, what is the destination I'd like to get to? How I actually get there could be loads of different ways to get there. It could be somebody knows, if we're talking about a job loss, somebody knows somebody. Okay, that's great. Or there's something in the paper, there's something on the internet. You put up a sign on your local community bulletin board. You never know where things could lead. And so with a plan, it's useful because it helps you set a goal.
I'm also, and again, I'm going to, give contradictory advice here, because a goal is important, I think, and I've done podcasts on this before. Systems are more important than goals. This isn't my idea. I stole this from Scott Adams. But so if what I want to do is, lose 10 pounds and get into better shape, well, I can set a goal of losing 10 pounds. And then if I only lose 9 pounds, I'm a failure. But if I lose 11 pounds, then I guess my goal wasn't enough. I'm a bigger believer in, come up with the system. Get rid of all the junk food from your house and go for a walk every day. And, you'll probably achieve your goal better. But I still had a target in mind, which was I wanted to be healthier. Maybe it wasn't as precise a goal as, losing exactly 10 pounds, but it's, I guess, the same kind of concept. One way or the other, you got to take the step back and think about where you're trying to get to. Because if you don't have some kind of target in mind, then I don't think you're ever going to get there.
Yeah, because what you're talking about here is the process to get to in the right direction is really what you're like you're obviously not driving a plane, so you don't need to get right to the Toronto airport. But it would be useful to say, I want to get to Toronto, so that you don't end up in Ottawa. And so then there's all the strategy, and then people start using different words. There's tactics, there's strategies, there's processes, there's methods, and it's what works for you is going to be the one that you'll probably keep at.
Yeah, and obviously, if I am a pilot and I do have to land on that runway, then I better have a pretty specific goal. If what I want to do is be healthier, well, then it's a bit loosier-goosier then. So, okay, let's talk about then, how do you know? So I'm on one path and I probably need to be on a different path. How do I know when to step off the path that I'm on? So maybe I'm in a crappy job, for example, and it's time to transition to something better. How do I think through that decision? How do I know when to end it?
That's a tough one, isn't it? Because again,
that's why I ask the hard questions here, you see, because I want the answers. How do you know when to end it?
Oftentimes we are getting signs and signals and signposts are, being put in front of us that tell us this is not working. And for various reasons, people stay, Doug. Sometimes they have to stay because they need the job. They need the money. They're supporting other people. And that's why one of the things that is useful is to keep remembering, is my life meaningful? Like, are there good things to think about? What are the good things that are coming of this? And then, okay, what would it look like if it was better? And that's where you start imagining, what would it look like if it was better? And if it was better, what would be the things, the steps I'd need to go through, the processes I'd need to start putting in place to make it better? And it would be lovely if it was just black and white, do this, don't do that. But as you know, everything is nuanced. And therefore, someone suddenly says, I have this gut feeling it's not good, or I'm not sleeping well, or I'm not really delivering the kind of work that needs to be done. Is a choice going to be made for me that I'm not even going to be made? Do I need to be more proactive in looking at it? It's a tough one. And that's why it's so important to be able to come to someone like you, for example, for a second opinion. Go to someone you trust and ask them what they would do. That's the kind of thing where you need to get out of your head, because as you know, once you're facing some of these tough decisions, you're at the meerkat stage where you're up and you're contemplating, what am I going to do? You start looping in your head the same thing because you're back in your brain and your neural pathways saying the same thing. Whereas if you can go and reach out to other people, sometimes there's an opportunity where they say, well, you've always been really good at talking. Why don't you start a podcast? And it may never have occurred to you. And there's a lot of things you can do, as you know, on the side. Mm-hmm. You don't have to stop one thing completely before you begin another one. You can start slowly easing into something on the side and see how that works. Because once you do that, it'll be unfamiliar. You'll be very creative, and things will come forward that you didn't realize were going to come forward, because we don't know what the future is, but our ability to say, bring it on, because whatever it is, I'm going to feel confident that I can keep trying it, because I do develop my coping skills. I do seek to learn. I do try new things. I remember years ago, I talked to an actuarial group. They were graduating. And they said, what's the best bit of advice you'd give to us? Because we're just starting on our career. And my advice was, try something new every day, because you never know where it will lead you. And it also gives you excellent skills at things that are new, so that when something does happen to you, you aren't suddenly, as you said, deer in a headlight, you're frozen because you don't know how to cope with the new.
Yeah, and I like your concept of it doesn't have to be a 180-degree turn either. So if I'm in a crappy job, I don't have to quit the job and then go look for a new one. I can think about what I would like to be doing that would be less crappy, but I can also be starting some stuff on the side, which may or may not turn into anything. And maybe it's something that I do on the side, which is purely to make a few extra bucks, because if I got a few extra bucks, I've got more flexibility. So lots of people here in Toronto drive for Uber. They do Uber Eats. They've got all these side hustles that, okay, puts a few extra bucks in the bank so that if I do have a forced transition or unforced transition, I've got a bit of a backup.
Yeah, it's giving them more skills too. They're meeting more people. They're networking more.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it then. So, okay, I'm in this job now. I'd like to be in this job. And I have this discussion with clients all the time. Okay, so what does it take to get to that job then? Well, I'd really like to work with animals. Okay, so why don't you go volunteer at the animal place then? Why don't you go, start. I'd really like to work with kids. Okay, that's crazy. I don't know why you'd want to do that. But okay, why don't you find a way to, start pursuing that? You may find you don't actually like it. You may find you love it. You may find you're great at it. But it doesn't mean you have to quit your job in the factory to go and start doing that. And I think that's one of the ways to alleviate the stress of the transition is you've got a couple of different parallel paths going. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, Doug, the question that when people ask me that, I say, what's one thing you can do tomorrow that would get you closer to that? So I'm not asking them to have the complete plan of, I remember when I was training in innovation, I used to say to people, a new idea is like a baby. It's a newborn. So when you have a newborn, do you look at them and say, how come you're not in university yet? Do you look at them and say, where's your resume? You don't, because they're a newborn. What do? You love them, you care for them, you feed them, you're tender towards them. And that's the same in transition. Have that same loving tenderness to yourself because you are undergoing change. And change can be explosive, chaotic, calm, like glacial. There can be any number of ways in which change is occurring. However, if you keep saying to yourself, I'm doing really well, I'm moving forward, I'm trying new things, I am learning transitional skills, coping skills, those will be good for me in the future because we know things will continue to change. Yeah,
and I like that idea. One thing at a time.
Correct.
And I mean, I say that to people all the time when they come in to see me because, boy, there's a bunch of stuff they've got to do. They got to, gather a list of their creditors and they got to get their taxes filed and they got to do this. Okay, let's do one thing first. Let's get your taxes filed. That's a relatively simple thing to do. And then once that's done, we know where you stand with the government. Now let's do the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. And if you break it down into those little pieces, I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but a 1% change every day, that's got to be a pretty big percentage over the course of the year, right?
No kidding. If you do one thing differently every day or move towards a goal, 365 things you've done to get you closer to the goal and transition to what you want. Wow, that's amazing progress.
Yeah, that's absolutely massive. So I think that's some fantastic advice. We got the script here and we got to 1 page out of 10, so we kind of missed all the things we wanted to talk about. But are there any final comments you want to make then about this whole idea of transitions and how best to handle them? I mean, one of the things that I guess we've already talked about, is it better to go all in or is it better to take it slow with the big decisions? And I guess the answer is yes. Yes to both.
It's like the idea of evolution versus revolution. Mm-hmm. Evolution, things change gradually over time. You have a chance to get used to them so that you can cope more because they're more familiar. You get a bit more experience with them. Revolution, unfortunately, quick, severe, there's damage, okay? Severe consequences. So that's one of the ways to look at it as well, is evolution means we all kind of go together, moving in a direction, but revolution, not all people are going to make it.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't have a choice. If you got laid off today, then, I can't really take 2 years to evolve into a different type of position. I guess it's going to be a revolution then. I'm going to go head first into it. I guess I would summarize by saying, what you said, we're transitioning all the time. The pace of it is accelerating. Nobody stays at the same job for 20 years.
Yes, and one of the things that is so important, I think, when we look at something like transition or change or something that's falling on our head or we decide to make from within, is that even if you did go to work and you lost your job, which I have experience with, and it is traumatic, and recognize it's traumatic. And when you can kind of back away just a little bit from the edge of the cliff and sit down and say to yourself, what's good about it? And just that approach of what's good about it, you'll start to come up, nothing's good about it, might be your first answer, but the second one might be, I never liked it anyway. I wanted more time to do this. Now I can make some other changes if I like, because I'm no longer in this position where I thought this was the only pathway I had.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to end it. What's good about it? And I've had that happen, hundreds of times here. Well, I lost my job. Okay, well, that's bad because now you don't have a paycheck. But like you said, I didn't really like that anyways. That wasn't what I really wanted to do. But I would never have quit that job because I got a paycheck. I've got the security. I'm certainly not going to be doing anything different. But now that I've been forced to do it, it's kind of like, well, I'm 18 years old again. I've been forced to take this fresh start. Why not take advantage of it? Why not try a few different things and see what comes of it? So I think that's the way to do it. Embrace it. You can't control it anyways. So you might as well take full advantage of it.
Absolutely great.
Excellent. Victoria, thanks very much for being here.
My pleasure, Doug.
We'll have you back again sooner than 3 years. Next time you're on your Toronto trip, we'll have you back in. Thanks very much.
Great.
That was Victoria Ryce, and that was our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.